Hello, and welcome to Flap TV. Hello, welcome to Flap TV, we're the area's largest Facebook group dedicated to political discussion. Fitchburg-Leominster All Politics jumps from your computer screen to your television screen. Our guests for this episode, on the left, Bryan Nolan, on the right, Dan Olson. Issue 1, as public pension costs and health insurance costs continue to rise and put a drain on city budgets, more and more programs and services on the federal, state, and local level are being privatized, outsourced to for-profit corporations. Is this something the Twin Cities should consider as we grapple with our own budget issues? And if so, which city services are on the table for privatization? Mike?
It's not a cure-all, that's for sure. If you look at, for instance, the Leominster schools, okay, which you know, I have some experience in looking at the Leominster schools. They privatized their cafeteria program, their lunch program a few years back, okay, and decidedly mixed reviews, and that's being kind, okay. Now there's talking about outsourcing the custodian service despite some of the generous concessions made by the custodians, okay. So it's not a cure-all, that's for sure, because it depends on the actual service, because you do have that potential of seeing a decline in quality. You do have that potential of seeing just a general decline, and when you're not invested in the city or in the municipality, okay, it could affect your job performance.
Dan?
Well, tend to disagree with Michael, because when you privatize, you know, a public thing like the DPW or, you know, lunch ladies, cafeteria workers, janitors, you take that load, that long-term pension liability off from the city, and you're giving more available funds to go towards, you know, giving teachers better pay, giving those teachers better health care plans. As soon as you can take away those, I want to say non-essential, but things that can be privatized, as soon as you do that, you're going to be a lot better budget-wise.
Bryan?
Well, I think in general, privatization isn't the way to go. I don't think we should be privatizing our public services or any of our public employee benefits over to for-profit businesses whose main goal and purpose is to turn a profit at their stakeholders' expense. I mean, these people serve the general public every day. I think we have a duty to make sure that they're cared for, and privatization, I don't think will do that.
Cindy?
I disagree. I actually think that privatization of the pension plans is probably it's gonna have to be something that they look at some point. If you can, you know, roll it over into a 401k plan. I know that's not possible right now, but I think at some point they're gonna have to look at that. And, you know, the rest of us in the public, we do it all the time. Our pensions are in 401k plans, and we have a little bit more control over it. And that takes the pressure off the cities and the towns. The budgets are getting out of control, and we have to find a way to get them back in.
No, Michael brought up the point of quality suffering, and then Dan brought up the point of the DPW. Just from my own personal perspective, I know when I was on the city council, whenever there was a snowstorm, from the phone calls that I got, there was a distinct difference between the roads that were taken care of by the city workers and the roads that were taken care of by the private contractors. The private contractors tend to really baby their trucks, as people tend to do on their own property, and didn't get that blade down to the pavement, didn't get close to the berm. So you do have that. The question that I would put out to the group is that, you know, the point that Michael made about when they outsourced the cafeteria workers to Chartwell, basically all the cafeteria workers were laid off, and then they could reapply to Chartwell at lower pay, right? They lose their seniority, they lose their pay, they lost some of their benefits. And we're in a time now where we're looking at a shrinking middle class. We're looking at wage stagnation. We're looking at a time where people just can't make a living. And we like to rail against the corporations who are suppressing worker wages. Do we want our government to reflect that? How can the government take action and have the moral high ground if we're doing the same thing?
I mean, you know, I know the question was brought up regarding pensions, and well, are we going to say, well, why don't we attack pension reform? not a direct causal relationship there. And so I can't help but think there's these private companies out there looking to make a buck, looking to score a big contract, and they use that as an emotional issue. They use that as a wedge issue, like, oh, get those evil pensions off your books. Okay, come with us. Okay, we'll pay the workers less. We handle our 401ks, and so that we can get you a good deal. Okay, but I don't understand. Again, it's this habit we fall into that it's the private industry is a cure-all, yet the corporations are evil. Well, the two don't exactly. I mean, there's a conflict there. Why don't we talk about pension reform if we're going to talk about, rather than just hand over everything to private companies?
Dan, laying everyone off and having them reapply to do the same job, the same work for lower pay, is that the direction we want to go?
Well, I mean, if the job isn't worth as much as they're being paid for, then sure. I mean, why would we waste money overpaying people for doing stuff efficiently? Harvard Business Review actually did a little report on privatization, and they were pointing out that the fact that businesses want to be like cost efficient, and they want to find ways to cut costs, and they want to make a profit, that is a point to drive down cost right there. I mean, it's a win right off the bat.
I think if we were to go down the road to privatization of like pension plans, if we require these for-profit businesses to invest into a public fund that could be used to fund nonprofit and social ventures that specifically serve low-income and underserved populations, I think that would add a mechanism for that money to trickle down.
Cindy?
I don't see any other alternative, to be honest. If you privatize the pension plans, you're still keeping the same staff on board. I don't want to see anybody lose their jobs, and their other benefits, but I just don't know how the cities can afford to do that unless you look at taxes. That's the only other alternative. Are people willing to have their taxes increased to make up for that? Because at some point, something's got to go.
When we think about city services, we often think about police, fire, schools, right? But what's one of the fastest growing services? And it's IT, right?
Yep.
And so if the city looks to privatize IT, hardware issues, obviously you have local people come because you need to have that worked on. But for software issues, which is a lion's share of IT, a lot of these private companies are going to be outsourcing to India and to other countries. Should our tax dollars be used to privatize to companies that are going to be paying workers not only out of the city, but out of the country?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I don't like that either. I don't like that at all.
So how do you stop that if you put out to bid? If you
Slippery slope.
privatize something,
They
you
have to
put
be
it out to
American
bid.
company,
Well,
American workers.
in my opinion, working in IT, your IT director should know his way around software, like some form of programming, being able to be able to find the right people locally to be able to do this stuff. There's no reason why you should have to go to India unless you're, I guess a private company looking to push out the support faster. But if you're a city,
But that's what private companies do to
Right,
cut
well,
costs,
no,
right? And
no.
if we're going to outsource to private companies,
well,
that's how they're going to
yeah,
cut costs.
but I'm not saying outsource an IT company. I mean, an IT department. The IT department should be handled in-house. There's a lot of sensitive data in the city. We saw from that 2011 data breach that our IT staff wasn't up to par.
So what you're telling me, Dan, is the government can handle it better than private industry?
For the IT, yes, but that's just because it should all be handled in-house. You shouldn't be delegating these sensitive tasks of IT management to people in India or even people like out in Framingham or something,
Very good. Issue 2, a Massachusetts judge recently convicted Michelle Carter of involuntary manslaughter in the suicide of her ex-boyfriend. Dan, should people be held criminally responsible for encouraging someone to harm themselves, or are we ultimately responsible for our own decisions?
You know what? As hard as it is to say, we're all ultimately liable for our own decisions. If we're, a competent adult that can think for ourselves, and it's horrible to hear these stories. Well, this story, particularly this woman egging on this guy to end his life. If you read the messages, they're heartbreaking to read. But you read them, and she seemed very evil. But I don't think it was her fault. At the end of the day, we all do what we do, and You know, you can blame whoever you want for your actions, but at the end of the day, your actions are from what you do.
Bryan?
Well, look, I mean, I think if it's illegal to incite violence publicly, then I don't see how inciting violence directly into another individual is any different. And that's what I think this woman did in this case. But I think the really sad part is that there are services out there that exist right now that had these people been receiving, if they weren't, this whole situation might have been avoided.
Cindy?
I normally would say that, no, I think an adult makes their own decisions. This case was a little bit different. I believe that she actually had mind control over him. She demanded him to get back in the truck. He tried to get out, which means he wavered on his decision. And she had such influence on him that she got him to go back in there. She could have saved his life, and she chose not to. She bears responsibility in this.
Michael?
5 words: get back in the truck. Okay, that's to me is the dividing line between people being responsible for their own actions and, well, just because you say it or just because you text it, you have the the free will to not listen to them or turn off your phone or whatever. But where she, over a course of months, grooming this guy and leading this guy along, then when she finally, the word Cindy used, control, when she finally masterminded control over this guy, she used it to directly suppress any ability he had to escape that ultimate price.
I agree.
Back in the truck. That's why
Absolutely.
good cases make bad law. Every case is different. Is this going to throw open the doors for every text message? Oh, geez, I hope you go kill yourself or something. No,
No,
of course
definitely not.
That's why we have court cases.
Well, Vanity Fair did a pretty good expose on this, and they talked about it. When we think of the traditional involuntary manslaughter case, we think of a drunk driver who did not intend to kill a person, but for them deciding to drink and drive, get in the car, that person would have been alive, right? But now we're talking about using words. And can you use words to kill? Is that a slippery slope? And an example that they used, which I thought was interesting, is say you have a terminally ill cancer patient, and they're deciding that they're going to take their own life, which in Massachusetts, right, is illegal, as in most states. But they want the consent, they want the buy-in from their spouse, that if things get bad, they're going to take their own life. And the spouse gives the consent. And as things get rolling and as it gets closer, the spouse consents and encourages and consoles. Do we hold the spouse accountable and charge them with involuntary manslaughter for encouraging this? And I know that's a much more sympathetic
Yeah.
case.
Right.
But you're an attorney,
Yeah.
and I want to ask you,
Yeah.
should we be basing laws and prosecution based on the degree of sympathy, or should it be law and fact?
No, we should be basing trials and findings of fact on those things. In other words, that's why you have trials, to determine whether the facts fit the punishment. So in this case, you used the words consent. With Michelle Carter, I would not use the words consent. I would use the words force or cajole, or essentially you basically corner the guy into the vehicle. So again, that's why we have trials. And when it comes to laws, when it comes to prosecutions, the most overused term, in my opinion, is slippery slope. Because again, that's why you have court. And you know what? If a court goes too far, that's why you have higher courts, okay, to put some boundaries on it. And maybe the higher court in this case will put some boundaries on this one. And maybe they will say that the trial judge went too far, or maybe they will say the trial judge didn't go too far here. But a consent case like you just brought up, definitely no.
So are you saying that there's no possibility that he could have killed himself without her encouragement? Like,
Well,
that's.
But that's not.
But he tried to get out. He got out the truck. He literally got out the truck, so he changed his mind.
Right, but
That's
But
not
then
the
she told him to
findings.
get back in there, and he did. So she had control over his mind at that time.
But someone who's suicidal, it's not always just a dive right in decision. There's a lot of times where they go forward and then backwards, that they'll recede from what they want to do.
Well,
And
it
then
sounds-
eventually they will. And
It
there's a lot
sounds
of
like
warning
this had been
signs,
going
but-
on for a while, like the text
Yeah.
messages had been going on for a while, and she had been kind of egging him on for a prolonged period of time. So
She kept saying, this is what you wanted. Why aren't you doing it? Just do it. If you really want to do it, there's a million ways to do it. She was waiting for it to happen. She's an evil girl.
But she also could have chose
But
to
Cindy,
stop
if I told
talking
you,
to her.
I know.
Cindy, if I told you to jump off a bridge, would you?
No, I wouldn't, but I'm not in that frame of mind that I'm thinking of killing myself. So, she could have saved his life.
But is his frame
She
of
could have
mind
put, she
her
could have
response,
said,
her criminal
stay out the truck and I'll
responsibility?
call 911. She could have called 911 and said, I know where he is. He's trying to kill himself right now. She should have done something, and instead she pushed him to his death. I'm sorry, I disagree on
And
that.
go jump off a bridge is a figure of speech.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if I count the,
with the bungee
if I count the number of times I told Trump to go do something with himself, screaming at the TV, and if he actually did it, he would get kicked off TV for being pornographic. So I mean, it's like you don't literally, some things you don't literally interpret. But some cases are different, and this one's
Dan,
different.
can you kill with words?
No, you can't. You can hurt someone's feelings, I'm sure, but like my mother always said, sticks and stones may break my bones, words will never hurt me. As old as it is and as cliche as it is, I think it's true.
Good. She will be sentenced next month and could face up to 20 years in prison for this involuntary manslaughter conviction. We need to take a break. We're going to be back in 1 minute. Stay with us.
I am George Meridanian, and welcome to another edition of Chess Chat.
Issue 3, Governor Charlie Baker has come out in support of removing the Commonwealth's only monument to Confederate soldiers. It's a marker on George's Island placed there by the local chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1963. States across the nation are grappling with the emotional issue of whether or not to remove their Confederate monuments. Bryan, should they?
yes, I think they should. I think if the monument was to commemorate the Civil War as a whole, then its historical significance, I think that would be fine. But where it commemorates only Confederate soldiers, I think that even the money that goes into maintaining these things shouldn't be spent on commemorating and remembering ideas that were deemed obsolete by the rest of the United States and the rest of the world.
Cindy?
I don't think it should be removed. There's only one there. It's a piece of history. You just can't erase history. It's like saying, take down the Vietnam Memorial Wall, or do you take down the Holocaust Memorial? It's a piece of history. It had a huge impact on our country, and I personally don't think it should come down.
Michael?
There's a particular one I think Governor Baker went a little too far, because you're talking about Confederate soldiers that were just, in essence, fighting for their country, no matter how their direction might have been misguided looking back in history. I actually do think that the Baker administration went a little too far on this one. However, we were talking about slippery slopes. Down south, I fully agree with taking down statues of Robert E. Lee or these Confederate flag displays or things like that, because the difference is, this is where you get into, well, is Germany putting up statues of Hitler? Okay, talk about the Vietnam War Memorial? Okay, is North Vietnam putting up statues of Ho Chi Minh? There's a difference between recognizing history and applauding it or honoring it, and that's what you do with statues. You honor things. Now, in terms of Confederate soldiers, that's where I think it goes a little too far, though, because I do see the difference there.
Dan?
In my understanding, we have other memorials for Japanese, Nazi soldiers, and a lot of different countries we fought in war. We still have those. I think that just the fact it was a Confederate monument, it's politically charged, and there's no reason why why we should be ignoring these war veterans that were American soldiers, no matter what side they were on. Shouldn't be, taking down their memory. We should be learning from the history to know that, we shouldn't go down that road again.
Absolutely.
Michael made a distinction between Confederate soldiers and monuments to the Confederacy, such as Robert E. Lee, and Confederate flags. Now, Cindy and Dan both, you've come out against removing these monuments. Do you make the same distinction as Michael, or do you think that monuments to General Lee and Confederate flag should be removed?
You know what? If it's a statue of someone, I understand drawing the line. It's not like we have statues of current presidents, sitting presidents. Like, yeah, we have the Lincoln Memorial and things like that. But just something to remember these guys' names and where they were from, what they did, what they believed in. I don't think that's bad.
I don't agree with keeping up statues of people who instigated the wars, but we're talking about soldiers that fought in the war. Whether we agree with the war or not, they were there. They were doing what they had to do for their country, and that's what we do. We memorialize our soldiers.
Actually, weren't they doing what they were doing to rip apart the country?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
at
It
it.
depends on how you look at the issue, but they were doing what they thought they needed to do at the time.
We can say that a lot about a
Yeah,
lot of
I
regimes,
know,
can't we?
I know.
Bryan?
I think, I think if we want to commemorate and remember Confederate soldiers, we should do it in a museum with alongside other soldiers that died on the Union side. I think it's worth remembering. I think it's worth learning from, but I don't think that we should have.
So maybe we should just move the memorial then.
Yeah,
rather than
moving
just
it, I think would
eliminate it.
be a good solution to it.
I'd be
But
on
the
board with that.
location, though, it's pretty much a outside
Isolated
museum.
anyway,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's a museum. What was it, George's Island? Yeah, I've been there on a field trip when I was younger, and that whole place is just a walk-in museum. You get to see the prisons and where the boats are coming in. It's a great place.
So we've seen, and that one's isolated, but we've seen really large-scale protests in Louisiana lately with taking down monuments. It is an issue across
It's still
the
a hot button
country.
issue down there, yeah.
And I guess here's what I don't understand, and hopefully, Cindy and Dan can enlighten a little bit, is that I think all of us saw, the conservatives, the right wing in this country, really celebrate in Firo Square in Baghdad back in 2003 when they ripped down the statue of Saddam Hussein. The conservative icon hero Ronald Reagan standing up in 1987 and saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall," which in that wall was a symbolism, right, of the division of Germany and the communist occupation of East Germany, right? So we see the cheering in 1990 from the conservatives when the Soviet Union fell and the statues of Lenin and Stalin came down and were torn down. So why does the right in this country seem to celebrate tearing down and taking down statues and memorials to communist regimes and dictators, but have a real problem with taking down statues and celebrating racists and slave owners?
Well, first of all, Confederates weren't all racist slave
Yeah,
owners. That was
exactly.
just a component of the war. The Confederate soldiers were fighting for what they believed was constitutionally right, their states' rights. Whether it be part of that would be the slavery argument, but even people in the North are still owning slaves.
Here we go again with that revisionist history about the Civil
not
War. I
revisionist
remember the
history.
Simpsons episode. Yeah, there was a scene from The Simpsons where the convenience store owner was taking his citizenship test, and the questioner says, "One more question. What was the cause of the Civil War?" And he goes into this thoughtful explanation. Well, between the abolitionists and the interviewer says, "Just say slavery." It's what it was. Come on,
it
guys.
wasn't.
Oh, geez.
So
No,
do
the
we
Confederate
take down
flag
all
is
statues
slavery.
that have to do with history because somebody out there, that's a bad part of history. We don't want to remember that.
You don't make it a state monument. You don't make it part of the freaking state flag.
Yeah.
Well, that's a
They've
flag.
taken down the
yes.
flags. They've taken down all the Confederate
everyone.
flags. Well, they should, but they pretty much have addressed that
Yeah,
issue.
the state
and,
flag with the Confederate.
Dukes of Hazzard put aside,
this is a monument
But-
to recognize the American soldiers that fought during that war, and it happened. It's a
Confederate
piece of
soldiers.
history.
Well, no, but they're still U.S. veterans. They're recognized as veterans.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're Confederate soldiers or not. It's they're American veterans.
It's
that
more the
remain
history
Weren't they
piece of it.
combatants against the American government, though? Brian,
against the Union.
jump
Yeah.
in here.
Yeah, I think they were, I mean, the Confederacy was a separate country. It was not the United States. And at the time, those soldiers were fighting for a country that was at war with the United States.
Do you support California seceding?
Maybe.
Because it's California.
Oh yeah, I support it. Get them out of here.
There's a big part of our economy that would be
Yeah.
taken
Yeah.
out.
I don't know that we can do
Sixth or
that.
seventh largest economy in the world.
Cindy,
on
was
its
the
own.
Confederate, was the Civil War about slavery?
Part of it, yeah, obviously, yeah. I mean, it was about states' rights and slavery. The whole thing is, it was a mess.
It was about state
just-
rights as it
was-
pertains to slavery,
Yeah,
right?
it was a
I-
mess. It was a mess.
It's
yeah,
like
it
saying
was.
Syria's about.
But it's a
chemical
piece of
weapons,
history. You
It's
can't
a
wipe
there's a
history
whole lot of moving
away.
parts.
If you don't recognize it, we're doomed to repeat it.
So
and
would you be okay with putting up a statue to Hitler in
No,
Boston
not
Common?
at all, no.
Well, he's a piece of history, isn't he?
throw eggs
Yeah,
at
That's a
it,
big
yes.
piece of history.
I know, but you can't idolize a monster like that.
So why are we idolizing racist and slave owners? Why is that okay?
Because they
Well,
weren't
stop
all
calling them
racist and,
racist. Yeah,
and
exactly.
slave owners. They were American soldiers still
But
doing
you
what they
just
thought
said that they were
had to
fighting
do.
for slavery.
Well, that's what
States'
the
rights. It's-
states'
was-
rights, which had to
and-
do with
and
that.
Slavery was an integral part of the economy back then. These people, these landowners, whatever, it was wrong, but that was their bread and butter, and there was no actual plan to help them ease out of that. They were just going to cut them off right at the head and say, hey, good luck. And like I said, it was definitely wrong, but you can't be putting people's backs against the wall and expect them not to fight back.
Well, I mean, look, I think if it wasn't for slavery, there might have been a more peaceful solution to it. I think slavery was the main cause that led us to war, and if that wasn't the issue, I don't think the war would have taken place necessarily.
Exit question. For many years, as far back as I can remember, politicians, candidates in Leominster and Fitchburg have marched in the 4th of July parade in Fitchburg, carrying their signs, throwing out candy and lollipops to the spectators. They brought their supporters, they wore T-shirts. This year, the Civics Day Committee initially came up with a new rule that banned political candidates from marching. After an uproar on social media, they quickly reversed course and asked the candidates to come back in. But their initial reasoning was that there was a lot of complaints from people about the political division. I don't know if that's real or not, so I wanted to get some input from the group on whether or not political candidates belong in a parade. Cindy?
If any parade at all, it would be the 4th of July parade, because I mean that's what it's all about. It's celebrating Americans' history and politicians. That's part of it. I can't remember a parade never in my lifetime not having politicians. I think it would be kind of funny not to have them out there. The Grand Marshal out there with his political signs waving. And then what do? Do you tell the mayor, well, you can't go in the parade because it's politics? But yeah, you're going to stop everybody else from going.
Michael.
I think it's good that they reversed it.
Yeah, if it annoys somebody, because that was what the city was. Some people in the city were saying, well, it was annoying people. Well, if it annoys you, go buy a hot dog, go buy some cotton candy or something. I mean, it's who are they hurting? Go. Sure.
Dan.
I'm indifferent about it. The fact though that the government or arms of the government with their committees were banning people just makes Fitchburg look like a little North Korea right there. And just for that fact, I really wanted to see non-incumbent politicians being able to march in the parade.
Great. Brian?
I think they should. I just think that they shouldn't, necessarily have like a big float or anything. I think they should all have, just march. But I think it's a great symbol of our democracy and should be celebrated.
Sure is. Dan Olson, Bryan Nolan, thank you so much for joining us. That's all the time we have for today. Please join us for the next time on Flap TV. Bye-bye.